Our Colin Johnson reporting from the People and Practices Group at Intel Labs Future Technologies Research Center in Beaverton, Oregon, where social scientists study what matters to consumers worldwide. Today, computer scientist Sushmita Subramanian will describe the push and pull of social media.
Okay, I'm Sushmita Subramanian. I'm an interaction designer in PAPR, People and Practices Research at Intel. So overall, this project was on sharing presence, and our title is Are You Too Boring to Share? And the basic idea was we were trying to learn more about what people share right now in terms of media and who they share it with. And within the labs, we're doing a lot of sensor work around sensors capturing what you're doing, who you're with, how you're feeling, and we wanted to see if that work could be used to kind of enhance this process of media capture and sharing. So we did two studies. One study where we followed people around and acted as their sensor, and we kind of captured moments through their day that we thought sensors might capture. And then we reviewed the photos with them and looked through and said, which of these do you actually find interesting enough to share, and who would you share it with? And then as a second follow-up study, we had people go wild with their iPhone cameras, and they took photos for a week of all the moments that they were going through during their life, and then they talked to us later and told us which of those moments they'd actually share and who they'd share it with again. So we learned quite a bit about what people capture. There were, as kind of expected, there were a lot of pictures of people's pets and of their kids and of food, which kind of sums up into this notion of personal but boring moments in their life. What really surprised us, though, was that people had a very clear distinction of that set of personal but boring moments of things that they thought were too boring to share, and then things that they thought were interesting enough worth sharing. So this kind of illustrates that. This was a picture that they thought was personal but too boring to share, and this picture was a personal moment worth sharing. So subtle, right? So this is something that sensors wouldn't necessarily be able to automatically detect, but our participants seemed to have a very clear notion of what was worth sharing and what wasn't. And this kind of led us into this broader theme of managing identities. So people cared a lot about sharing in terms of managing their identities or crafting a personal brand for themselves. So it had to do with either showing something interesting and funny, and that was putting themselves out there as an interesting, funny person, or a lot of times they use these sharing moments to share something about their professional life. So for example, a few of our participants were in the design school, so they use certain forums to share interesting design aspects. So we thought one of the big things that would come up during the study was privacy, which is kind of an obvious concern that comes up in social networking applications. We were surprised to learn that people were much less concerned about privacy and much more concerned about whether something was interesting enough to share. So they cared a lot more about whether it would make them seem boring to share something. So for example, we went through like several photos and we asked them, would you be comfortable if someone had access to these photos? Most of the time they were completely fine if other people could access those photos. They just didn't want to explicitly share that content themselves because that would be putting themselves out there and showing that they thought it was interesting enough to share. So that was a very interesting finding for us. They also talked a lot about having several different identities, and they wanted these identities to kind of be filtered to different audiences. And the audiences weren't kind of the obvious ones that we've seen in kind of the initial Facebook lists or other things, which are like work, family, home. It had more to do with kind of how they were spending their time. So there were the people that they spent Saturday night with, which differed a lot from the people they were working on this specific project with versus the people they go biking with. And a lot of these groups were very dynamic, and they changed quite a bit, which makes for a pretty painful process if you're manually updating these groups and trying to manage them. So one of the things we were looking at is whether sensors could, for example, help in that process. If they're already tracking what you're doing and who you're with, could it also help you kind of manage these different audiences for you? The other finding that we kind of looked at was this notion of abstraction. So in a lot of social networking applications right now, the way privacy settings work is it's a binary share versus don't share. And for the most part, people didn't really they didn't want people to not see anything about them. They just wanted some people to see kind of a more filtered view or a more obscure view of them. So for example, one of our participants, his girlfriend's mother added him on Facebook. He accepted for obvious reasons because he can't really block her. So he still wants her to see certain things about his life and how he's spending his time, but he doesn't necessarily want her to have the same detailed view as the people that he goes out with on a Saturday night. So that was one thing. So overall, what we kind of found was there was this separation of content. When people were really concerned about managing their identity and crafting a brand for themselves, that usually related to pushing content out to a bigger audience. So that was stuff that they were carefully filtering, carefully creating, and then pushing to a much larger audience. And then on the other end of the spectrum was when they were managing a relationship. And that was kind of the everyday moments, the personal but boring things. And that usually went to a much smaller, very intimate circle of contacts, like their partner or their close group of friends.